Anybody got any ideas? They're all hiding, but let me put it this way. How successful at hiding are they? Lucy. They're not hiding properly. They're not hiding very well. They're not hiding successfully. Thank you. They're not hiding very successfully. They're all examples of unsuccessful hiding. This last one in particular is very interesting because it's a good job, isn't it, that it wasn't a more successful hiding. Just in case anybody's wondering, this is how you hide someone on the beach. You don't go any further up, just for sort of, health and safety and our insurance and things like that. So you know that. And I'm sure there are some people here who are much better at hiding than that. Anybody here think they're better at hiding than what some of these pictures have shown? I bet you are as well. There is a question on the sheets, I think, about what your favourite hiding places are in hide and seek. Anybody want to share what their favourite hiding place is? Esther. Hiding behind the sofa. Nathan. Behind the TV. That's difficult if you've got a wall-mounted TV, isn't it? Any more? In a cupboard. Now, by the way, if you're ever playing hide and seek now with any of these people, you now know where to look, the rest of you, don't you? They've given it away. Some people are successful at hiding. Some people are not very successful at hiding. Some things are easy to hide. And some things are very difficult to hide, next to impossible. Think about trying to hide an elephant in a Mini Cooper. Or think about, this is something that's very hard to hide, the sun. Oh, no. Needle in a haystack, that's easy to hide, isn't it? I forgot I had a picture about that. Needle in a haystack, can anybody see the needle? You can, it's not there, so that's very clever. Some things are very hard to hide, like the sun. Because even when the clouds cover it up, we still know it's there, don't we? We still feel its effect, even when there are things covering up the sun. It takes a heck of a lot more than just a bit of clouds hiding it from view to hide the sun. Well, Easter is the story of an unsuccessful attempt to hide someone, and of someone who is impossible to hide, it turns out. In the first part of the Easter story that Leslie read for us there, I don't know if you noticed, but everybody was trying to hide Jesus. They were trying to cover him over. They were trying to get him hidden from view. Some people with good motives, his friends. Some people with bad motives, his enemies. They were trying to keep Jesus hidden under wraps. Jesus hidden deep down in the grave, in death. Even though he had said all along that on the third day he would rise up from the grave. So, for example, Jesus is sealed in a tomb as Joseph of Arimathea comes and takes his body and wraps it up and lays it in his own freshly made tomb and rolls a great big stone over the entrance. Jesus is sealed in a tomb. And then next, Jesus is secured by soldiers. Because the chief priests and the Pharisees, they don't want somebody saying that Jesus has risen again from the dead. So they say, well, better guard the body. And so just as the Roman Empire helped them to put Jesus to death, they now want to use the Roman Empire to keep Jesus in the grave. And so the soldiers get what must have been their easiest assignment. And they're told they've got to keep this dead man dead. And there they are guarding the tomb. So Jesus is sealed in a tomb, secured by soldiers. But it's all pointing to the fact that everybody thought and everybody assumed and everybody believed that Jesus was swallowed up by death. That's what was really hiding Jesus. He'd been swallowed up by death itself, hidden from view and gone. We might even call it death's big cover-up. Death's big cover-up. And that's when I guess we start to see why this matters so much. Let me put it this way. If the story finished at the end of Matthew chapter 27, just think what sort of a world we would be living in. Who would win? Well, death would win. And those who would use death and the threat of death to get their way Death and evil would win, like Jesus' enemies and the Roman Empire that they trusted in to put Jesus in the grave and to keep him there. Evil and oppression and violence and sin and death would win in a world like that. And in the end, death's big cover-up would be the end of not just Jesus' story, but the end of everybody's story. The end of the story of the world. One day everything would be swallowed up. But it turns out that this attempt to hide Jesus by the powers of sin and evil and death was an unsuccessful attempt at hiding. Because it turns out that Jesus is impossible to hide. We're going to see that trying to keep Jesus hidden in the grave is like trying to hide an earthquake. That might help you with something on your sheets, kids, if you're still tracking them. Trying to hide Jesus in the grave is like trying to hide an earthquake, because God's answer to death's big cover-up is God's great shake-up. But before we learn about that, we're going to sing, and then we're going to hear the next part of the Easter story. Paul is going to come and read it to us. So the musicians are going to come out and lead us in a song. Let's stand with them, and then Paul will give our next part of the reading.
For our second reading this morning, we return to Matthew's account of the events immediately following the death of Christ. That's Matthew chapter 28, and we're going to read the first 10 verses, still on page 835 of the Church Bible. We join the two Marys who witnessed the death, but now something else. Now after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me."
Well, now after that reading, kids, if you're still doing the sheet, you should be able to fill in the little bit that is about what happened on Easter morning. Trying to keep Jesus hidden in the grave is like trying to hide an earthquake. God answers death's big cover-up with God's great shake-up. Jesus rises again, and the whole world is shaken up, is changed, is rearranged. Jesus' rising again is like an eruption, a seismic event that actually is still going on today. We still feel the effects today. An earthquake that shatters and shakes the powers of sin and evil and death that would like to keep Jesus hidden, just as they would like to keep their grip on the whole world. We sometimes think maybe of that first Easter Sunday morning as a sort of a quiet kind of an affair. Jesus is risen again, and it's all kind of sunshine in the garden and little butterflies fluttering by and angels speaking in soft tones and nice sort of tinkly music in the background and soft focus cameras. But what actually happens is, well, it's more of a rumble than that, isn't it? There is literally an earthquake, did you notice? As the angel ascends to announce that Jesus is risen. I like to think of it as the angel lands. I like to think of it like one of those scenes in a Marvel movie where sort of Iron Man zooms down and lands in a cool pose. As the angel descends from heaven like a lightning bolt, hits the stone, backflips, and ends up sat on it in a perfect position. And it's not just the ground that's shaking, is it? Did you notice who else was shaking? The Roman soldiers. They were shaking as well. The great big stone is rolled away. The great big stone is rolled away. Next one. The stone is rolled away, and then the might of imperial Rome crumbles. Just crumples, folds, collapses in a shivering pile of jelly on the floor. But the angel is simply doing all of that to reveal the real earthquake that has happened, which is that Jesus is risen. As he announces, verse 6, he is not here, he has risen, just as he said. We saw in the first half, Jesus got more and more hidden, didn't he? The stone over the tomb, the guards on the tomb. Jesus was swallowed up by death, it seemed. But here he gets more and more visible as the stone rolls away, the soldiers crumple and crumble. The angel announces he's risen, and the angel says, and you will see him. And then they do. And then Jesus says that more people will see him, even his brother disciples who'd failed him. Death has tried to swallow Jesus up, but you can't keep him hidden there. He has burst through. And that's why this is such a shake-up. It's like everything from Friday night is being thrown into reverse. On the Friday night, the disciples were scattered and they'd failed Jesus. Today, he promises that they will see him again. Friday night, those women could only watch in sorrow. They were helpless, passive, just watching. Today, their helpless sorrow has turned to joy and action as they rush off to tell the disciples. On Friday night, the powers of sin and evil and death were in charge. The might of the Roman Empire had stomped on Jesus. His enemies had conspired and had him done away with. The grave had swallowed him up. Well, this morning, Jesus sweeps them aside as if they are nothing. It's not overstating it to say that what emerged from the tomb on that first Easter Sunday was a whole new world. That dawning of a new week was also the dawning of a new world. If we could have the next picture, please. Brilliant. A new world in which death's big cover-up is not the end of the story. Not for Jesus, not for anyone who puts their trust in him, and not even for creation itself. And that is not something you can hide. Historian Tom Holland has said that what happened at Easter sparked the most disruptive, the most influential, and the most enduring revolution in human history. And we can still feel the effects of that earthquake all around us today. For example, 1/3 of the world agrees that Jesus is Lord, even of death. And today, that news that we shared at the beginning, he is risen. That is going to be proclaimed and celebrated and rejoiced in on every continent and in multiple languages, the whole world over. But that's just the beginning. This whole new world that dawned when Jesus burst free from death on Easter Day, well, one day the sun is going to come in full strength. Jesus has promised it. And this first Easter morning gives us just a glimpse of what that will mean. Sorrow will be turned to joy. Evil, sin, and death will be no more. And we will see him. Now, if we think we'd like to be in on something like that, if we think that's the sort of world I'd like to live in, not the sort of world where sin and evil and death are in charge, but the sort of world where Jesus is in charge, well, it is only possible with the risen Jesus. If we would rather Jesus stay away and stay hidden, that is a choice for sin and evil and death over Jesus' new world. We will hate his new world of his if we don't love him, because he is its center, he is its shining sun, he is its Lord. But if you want a world like that, then what you want is a world ruled by Jesus. And when Jesus says, "Follow me," this is where he is leading. Don't you want in on that? Well, we've got the final part of the story to consider. But I want you to keep that question in your mind. Don't you want in on this new world of Jesus's, revealed on resurrection morning? Keep that question in your mind as we sing this next song. It gives us words to celebrate what it was that happened on Easter morning. Let's stand together. Let's sing before we have the final part of the Easter story. Thank you at the back. I'm going to need your help just one last time. We're going to read that in just a moment. But first of all, Matthew tells us in this next reading, I have to warn you that death's big cover-up continues. The empire of sin and evil and death strikes back. See if you can see how as we read Matthew 28. And we're going to read just verses 11 to 15. The last bit of the story that we're looking at today. Matthew 28, verse 11. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. Well, as I said, after all that Matthew tells us, death's big cover-up continues. If we could have the next picture at the back, please. The empire of sin and evil and death strikes back. It always does. But the only way it can do it after Easter Sunday morning is with lies. That's all it's got. Lies. They pay the soldiers to say the body was stolen. And the people who were saying, "Oh, Jesus was an imposter," on Friday night. That imposter said he was going to rise again from the dead. Well, now who's the imposter? Who's the liar? Who's the faker? But that's all they've got to cover up Jesus anymore. He's burst free from the grave. So they try to cover him over with lies. Today, that carries on. Matthew says it has carried on amongst his own people, the Jewish people, down to his own day. Well, actually, let me suggest it's carried on throughout the world. Down to today, people try to hide Jesus over with lies, behind all sorts of lies and distractions and fake alternatives and falsehoods and made-up stories. Sometimes, just like these chief priests and elders did, they come up with something about, well, dead people don't rise, so of course Jesus didn't rise again from the dead. And they come up with all sorts of fantastical theories to explain away the clear evidence. People will say to you, well, death is the end, we know that. But it's just more fake stories, covering up the reality of Jesus, or trying to. Maybe the biggest lie today, though, is that we don't need Jesus to rise again from the dead. We tell ourselves that other things will fix what's wrong with our world. Yes, we see that there's evil, sin, and death, but something else will fix that. Maybe it will be our money or our ingenuity or our science or our leaders or ourselves. We'll save us. We'll make that new world, and we'll make ourselves new in the process too. We don't need Jesus to rise again from the dead. Death's big cover-up continues to this day, but God's big shake-up includes a plan to combat that too. Because that new world is only possible with the risen Jesus, and that is something that the whole world needs to hear, isn't it? The whole world. Because it's the only hope for our world. Jesus won't stay, and Jesus can't stay hidden, and you and I can be a part of that. And God shows us how, because it all began with these witnessing women. They were a crucial part of God's big shake-up on that first Easter Sunday morning. And they show us how we can be part of it too. The 2 nights before, when it looked like evil and sin and death was in charge, God had these women in place, ready for what their crucial role would be. We read, didn't we, in verse 56, that they watched him die from a distance, powerless, helpless to do anything, but they were exactly where God needed them to be. And then we were told, verse 61, that they saw exactly where he was buried. And then we're told in verse 1 that they were exactly where they needed to be with the angel and the earthquake and the soldiers, and to see everything that happened. And then they're the first to hear that Jesus is risen, and the first to see and to meet the risen Jesus themselves, because they're going to be the first people given this crucial role to play in God's big shake-up. As the angel says in verse 7, quickly go tell. And Jesus himself says, go tell my brothers. And they do. From these women, it will go to the whole world. Goes to the 11 remaining disciples and the rest of the disciples, and from there eventually to the whole world. We are here this morning because those women did what they were told to do by the angel and by the Lord Jesus. It's interesting, isn't it? It's not the 12 disciples who we've been following all the way through Matthew's gospel. It's not the 12 disciples who show us what it means to follow Jesus. It's these women who looked weak and helpless. They were weak and helpless on Friday night, like everyone else. It's these women who show us what it means to follow Jesus. Look at their fear and joy. Verse 8. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. They love Jesus. And the fact that he is risen again over death, and he's Lord even of death, it thrills their hearts so much that they tremble. But it's not trembling like the soldiers. They're not scared like the soldiers. It's trembling with joy. And that's why when they see Jesus, they worship him. They do what you should do when you see the risen Jesus. They fall at his feet and worship him. And then they do what Jesus tells them to do. They go and tell. They start off powerless, but then Jesus' resurrection turns them into joyful, worshipping witnesses. And so God calls us to be part of his great shake-up. The good news that won't stay hidden, just as Jesus won't stay hidden in death. God calls you, if you've never trusted Jesus before, he calls you to become a joyful, worshipping witness of him this morning. He calls you if you've failed him recently, this week, this morning. He calls you if you feel weak and helpless in a world that tries to hide Jesus from view. It calls you if you look at sin and evil and death in you and around you, and you long for a new world. He calls you to be a joyful, worshipping witness. Know that Jesus is risen today and become his joyful, worshipping witness. We're going to sing a final song that enables us to do that. We've already said in our first song that we will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. This final song gives us words to do that, to boast in his resurrection. Let's stand together and with joy sing of Easter morning.